My name is Alex Carter. I'm 39 years old. I've spent over a decade building my team from scratch, mentoring each member, and creating a department that consistently exceeded expectations. I wasn't the loudest or the flashiest, but results mattered more than appearances. Yet one afternoon, while I was tied up in a critical meeting, my boss made a move that would change everything. I returned to find my team's desks stacked and moved into the basement. Boxes were scattered, cables dangling, the fluorescent lights buzzing above a space that felt more like a storage room than a workplace. My boss's note, left carelessly on the doorway, read, "Our new star employee deserves the best offices." I walked in, and the expressions on my team's faces told me everything I needed to know: betrayal, frustration, disbelief. For a moment, I let the silence stretch, feeling the initial sting of the slight, the audacity of his decision. Anger could have flared, I suppose, but I didn't let it. I watched my team, their eyes darting between me and the chaos above, and realized that their morale was my responsibility. And while my boss may have thought this a clever display of favoritism, he had no idea he was about to awaken something far more precise and calculated. I smiled, not out of amusement, but out of calm control. I looked around at the makeshift basement, the boxes, the dim lighting, and said softly, "Pack your bags." My words carried no rage, no hysteria, just quiet authority. The room froze, confusion mixing with curiosity. My team stared, uncertain of what I meant, and I let the weight of the moment settle. I didn't need to yell or confront my boss immediately, or make a scene. Every move I made from this point would be deliberate. Every step would be calculated, ensuring that when the dust settled, the scales of power would shift quietly, strategically, and irrevocably. My smile remained calm, even as questions filled the room, questions that would only be answered in time. By the time I left that basement, my mind was already working. I traced the weaknesses in my boss's assumptions, the arrogance that led him to believe a new hire could supplant years of loyalty, and the gaps in his oversight that no one else noticed. I didn't react impulsively. I planned, and in that planning, I felt the first thrill of quiet control, a victory yet to be realized, but inevitable. That evening, I sat alone in my apartment, replaying the day over and over. The sense of betrayal wasn't just about the basement or the stolen office space. It was about years of dedication dismissed without thought. I had poured myself into the team, into the projects, and into cultivating trust, and now, one impulsive decision by my boss threatened to unravel everything. Yet anger had no place here. Clarity did. I thought back to subtle signs I had ignored, the occasional praise of the new star, the private meetings that excluded me, the whispers of favoritism. At the time, I had brushed them off, trusting that results would always speak louder than politics. But today, those whispers had manifested into an open slight. My team's disappointment cut deeper than the insult itself. Their loyalty had been my responsibility, and I felt the weight of that betrayal alongside the sting of my own. I spent hours examining the situation, identifying the weaknesses in my boss's decision-making and the assumptions behind his arrogance. He had underestimated my patience, my intelligence, and my ability to strategize quietly. The more I analyzed, the clearer it became. The basement move was not just an insult, it was a perfect opening for me to regain control. But it had to be done with precision, without confrontation, without the rashness that would reveal my hand. I reached out, subtly, to colleagues outside my immediate team, gauging reactions and assessing loyalties. No one had yet spoken up. No one had attempted to challenge the new arrangement. That silence was a goldmine. It was not apathy, but fear and uncertainty, waiting to be leveraged. Every conversation, every observation, became a thread in the strategy I was quietly weaving. As the night wore on, I drafted potential scenarios. What if I allowed my boss to believe his favoring of the new hire had secured supremacy? What if I quietly positioned my team to shine so brightly in the basement that his judgment would be revealed as short-sighted? Anger was irrelevant. Strategy, observation, and patience were all that mattered. I could see the end game, and it was only a matter of careful execution. By the time I went to bed, I had a plan forming in my mind. The basement was not a prison, it was a stage, and I was about to orchestrate a performance that would illuminate my value, the loyalty of my team, and the short-sightedness of my boss. I didn't need confrontation, I only needed quiet, precise moves. And for the first time, I felt the calm certainty that control was slowly returning to my hands. The next morning I arrived at the basement early. Long before anyone else, I walked the cramped space, noting the awkward furniture arrangements, the dim lighting, and the energy of my team. Instead of letting frustration take hold, I smiled quietly and began envisioning how we could turn this space into our advantage. Every obstacle my boss had created was a chance to demonstrate ingenuity and resilience. I called a brief team meeting, keeping my tone calm and measured. I didn't complain, I didn't accuse, and I certainly didn't lash out. Instead, I framed the basement as an opportunity, a challenge we could conquer together. The team, still reeling from the initial insult, listened cautiously as I outlined small, achievable steps to reorganize, optimize, and make the space functional. My calm confidence began to shift their mood. Even in the shadows of the basement, purpose could be restored. Next, I began mapping the projects that had been sidelined while the upper office spaces were given to the new hire. Every task, every client, every overlooked opportunity became a quiet lever I could pull. I didn't act openly against my boss. That would have been reckless. Instead, I quietly ensured that our team's work would soon be undeniable, efficient, and impossible to ignore. Every late night, every small innovation, every meticulous report was a silent demonstration of our competence. I also observed the new hire from a distance, noting strengths and weaknesses, habits and assumptions. My boss had believed this employee would outshine us quickly, but arrogance blinds people to subtle patterns. The new hire's lack of institutional knowledge, the tendency to overlook critical details, and the reliance on directives created gaps that could be leveraged. Quietly, I began positioning the team to highlight these gaps without direct confrontation. By the end of the week, we had transformed the basement from a punishment into a productive, energized environment. My team's morale, once low, now hummed with quiet determination. Reports were sharper, progress was faster, and efficiency grew. The new hire, meanwhile, remained unaware that their every move was now being quietly compared to the excellence thriving below. My boss, thinking he had made a brilliant choice, had unknowingly handed us the tools for ultimate leverage. That evening, I documented everything: small wins, subtle improvements, and the growing contrast between our basement performance and the superficial shine of the upper office. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to confront. I only needed patience. The quiet plan had taken root, and every day brought us closer to the moment when the truth of competence, loyalty, and foresight would quietly, undeniably expose my boss's short-sightedness. Within 2 weeks, the changes we implemented in the basement began to yield results. Projects that had been delayed for months were now ahead of schedule. Client feedback was overwhelmingly positive, and internal reports showed measurable improvements. Yet I did not announce our progress. I did not brag. I simply let the work speak for itself. The quiet momentum was far more powerful than any confrontation could be. I started leaving subtle notes for our boss, updates framed as casual check-ins rather than evidence of our efficiency. The team responded to the basement as if it were their own proving ground. Morale soared under the calm guidance I provided, and the camaraderie strengthened. They knew, even if I did not explicitly tell them, that we were setting the stage for something larger. Their confidence in me, and in themselves, became a subtle force that would ultimately make the upstairs superiority of the new hire appear shallow and superficial. I also leveraged indirect communication channels, sending small successes to other departments and clients without drawing attention to the underlying strategy. Praise began to circulate quietly, like whispers, highlighting our team's competence and professionalism. Every mention, every acknowledgement was a silent dagger to the illusion my boss had created with his favoritism. And yet, there was no confrontation, no anger, only calculated observation and patient strategy. By the end of the month, cracks in the boss's confidence were visible to anyone paying attention. His casual glances toward the basement team betrayed unease, and his decisions grew cautious, almost defensive. He still believed he was in control, yet every move we made beneath him quietly shifted the balance. And I, watching with calm satisfaction, knew the stage was set for the final act, where quiet competence would expose arrogance without a single shout or accusation. He began to approach me with questions, subtly testing my knowledge and judgment. I answered with measured precision, calm confidence, and no trace of hostility. Each response reinforced his growing unease. He couldn't understand why his star employee wasn't generating the expected results while my team, relegated to the basement, seemed unstoppable. I allowed his confusion to grow naturally, never forcing the issue, never providing more than necessary. The new hire struggled more visibly, their mistakes now magnified against the backdrop of our quiet success. I did not intervene. I did not correct publicly. I only ensured the contrast remained apparent. Every slip, every miscalculation became a testament to the depth of experience, patience, and strategy my team brought to the table. The basement, once a symbol of punishment, had become a theater of undeniable authority. Colleagues and clients began commenting indirectly on the improvements, praising efficiency and insight. These endorsements circulated quietly, reinforcing our team's reputation, while my boss remained unaware of the full extent of his miscalculation. Even his casual attempts to regain authority seemed ineffective. The credibility he once held was quietly eroding. The irony was exquisite, yet I remained silent, letting the work itself speak volumes. I also used small indirect reminders to highlight his blind spots. Emails, meeting notes, and subtle mentions of overlooked issues forced him to confront errors he had not anticipated. He was fraying under pressure, unaware that these were orchestrated through patient observation and planning rather than aggression. Each moment of hesitation, each second of doubt, strengthened the leverage my team had quietly gained. By the end of this phase, my boss's posture had shifted from confident control to cautious scrutiny. He no longer assumed mastery over decisions or outcomes, and I, observing in quiet satisfaction, recognized the inevitability of the final stage, his realization, silent and undeniable, that arrogance had been met, not with rage, but with calm, precise, unstoppable competence. The basement had become a fortress of strategy, and the power dynamic had finally begun to tilt in our favor. I began using the basement team's progress as subtle leverage, not through confrontation, but through carefully framed updates and casual mentions in meetings. Each report highlighted our accomplishments without directly challenging my boss, allowing leadership to notice results, while he remained unaware of the growing contrast. It was a delicate balance, influence without exposure, strategy without overt confrontation. When senior managers came to review our projects, I ensured that my team's presentations were flawless, polished, and professional. Every graph, every metric, every client feedback highlighted competence and reliability. My boss sat in the room, nodding along, completely oblivious that he had created the conditions for our quiet triumph. The basement, once a symbol of punishment, had become a stage for undeniable authority. I continued to guide my team with calm precision, encouraging initiative and creativity while keeping my own hand invisible. Mistakes were corrected discreetly, achievements were highlighted subtly, and the contrast between our performance and the new hires' increasingly visible errors grew naturally. I didn't need to draw attention. The work itself spoke volumes, building leverage that would soon be impossible to ignore. Indirectly, I allowed whispers of our success to spread. Colleagues mentioned improvements in casual conversation, clients praised responsiveness in passing notes, and other departments began referring inquiries to us rather than the upper office. Each small acknowledgement quietly undermined my boss's perceived control, creating pressure that he could neither see nor counteract directly. Even the new hire, once brimming with overconfidence, began to stumble under scrutiny. I never pointed out errors publicly. I let them accumulate naturally, juxtaposed against the team's growing proficiency. The contrast was stark, but entirely invisible to those not paying attention. And yet I knew senior leadership was noticing, slowly piecing together the reality my boss had ignored. By the end of the week, a sense of quiet inevitability settled over me. The foundation for the next stage of control had been laid. The boss would soon be forced to confront our success, not through arguments or confrontation, but through the undeniable facts of competence, loyalty, and strategic execution. And in that calm certainty, I felt a profound satisfaction, silent, measured, and entirely mine. It happened subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. During a quarterly review, a senior executive paused mid-discussion to comment on a recent project delivered by our basement team. The praise was casual, professional, almost offhand, but it carried weight. My boss, seated beside me, shifted uneasily, as if the recognition had landed in a place he hadn't anticipated. The contrast between our team's output and his assumptions began to surface, silently but unmistakably. I didn't speak up. I smiled quietly, letting the acknowledgement settle in the room. My team's faces reflected restrained pride, but none of us needed to exaggerate our success. The work itself was eloquent. Every metric, every completed project, every satisfied client became a quiet testament to our competence. Leadership noticed, and my boss could only watch, powerless to claim the credit or redirect attention. Subtle questions began surfacing. Why was our team so efficient? Why were client complaints decreasing, while reports from the upper office were lagging? My boss fumbled for answers, offering vague explanations and citing factors outside his control. I allowed him to stumble. I didn't intervene. Every hesitation, every moment of uncertainty reinforced the quiet leverage I had cultivated without a single confrontation. I continued to feed information strategically, not through boastful announcements, but through carefully timed updates and concise emails. The tone was always professional, neutral, unassuming, yet every message highlighted our accomplishments and contrasted them with gaps elsewhere. Leadership absorbed the information, piecing together a narrative my boss had never considered, that competence, patience, and loyalty could quietly outshine flashy appearances. Even the new hire began to notice subtle changes. Requests for guidance were met with quiet efficiency from the basement team, while upper office mistakes became more apparent. The contrast was undeniable, yet unspoken, forcing my boss into the uncomfortable position of watching his assumptions unravel without any recourse. Every minor error he failed to anticipate added weight to our growing credibility. By the end of the week, I felt a calm certainty. Recognition was shifting subtly, but irrevocably. The boss's confidence had begun to erode in small increments. While my team's influence and reputation quietly expanded, I didn't need to claim victory. It emerged naturally from competence, observation, and strategic patience. And in that quiet unfolding, I realized the first true stage of our reversal was complete. Power had begun to tilt without confrontation, and the final act was only a matter of timing. By now, the shift in perception was unmistakable, even to casual observers. Colleagues who once deferred to my boss began seeking guidance from our basement team, asking questions that previously would have been addressed upstairs. The boss, once the center of authority, found himself sidelined, his once commanding presence reduced to tentative interventions that no longer carried weight. I did nothing overt. I simply continued to excel quietly, letting the contrast speak for itself. Clients, too, began noticing. Emails praising our responsiveness and clarity arrived with increasing frequency, highlighting our consistent performance, while the new hires' contributions fell short. Each acknowledgement was subtle, indirect, yet cumulative. My boss tried to counterbalance it with his own initiatives, but the cracks in his credibility were widening, fueled by the undeniable competence of the basement team and the quiet precision of our work. I observed every misstep, every hesitation, every moment of uncertainty with careful attention. I didn't need to highlight errors directly, they became apparent naturally. Each faltering attempt to assert authority only reinforced the narrative of inefficiency upstairs. The more my boss struggled to regain control, the more isolated he appeared, and the more influence my team quietly gained. Patience was proving far more effective than confrontation. Even casual interactions began to betray his eroding influence. Employees who once sought his approval now came to me for advice, strategy, and problem-solving. He noticed the shift, and I could see it in his posture. Small hesitations, sideways glances, subtle attempts to regain presence, all of which only underscored his diminishing control. I remained calm, steady, and deliberate, fully aware of the quiet revolution unfolding beneath him. I also cultivated discreet alliances, reaching out to other departments with indirect updates on our progress. Nothing flashy, nothing self-serving, only factual professional communication. These small touches reinforced the basement team's credibility and amplified my boss's isolation. While he had assumed that promotion, favoritism, and the new hire would consolidate his dominance, each day revealed that control was slipping, silently and inevitably. By the end of the month, it was clear that isolation had taken hold. My boss was no longer the unchallenged authority he once appeared to be. The basement, once a symbol of punishment, had become a quiet seat of power, a testament to strategy, patience, and competence. And in that calm certainty, I knew the final stage, the strategic, quiet, undeniable reclaiming of authority, was only a matter of precise timing and execution. The moment had arrived to consolidate all the quiet leverage we had accumulated. I began by submitting a series of reports to senior leadership that showcased the basement team's progress, achievements, and client successes. The tone was factual, neutral, almost understated, but the data spoke volumes. Each figure, each success story, quietly highlighted the contrast between the basement team's competence and the shortcomings upstairs. I didn't make a single accusation. I didn't reveal my personal stake, and I didn't confront my boss. The brilliance of this strategy lay in silence, letting the evidence do the talking. Leadership, reviewing the reports, began asking questions directly about the basement team's workflow, client handling, and efficiency. My boss had no answers that could explain the widening performance gap. Every attempt to justify past decisions only exposed errors in judgment and overconfidence. The new hire's growing frustration became another piece of subtle leverage. Overwhelmed and underprepared, they began making small, increasingly noticeable mistakes. I let them continue without interference, allowing natural consequences to accumulate. Each slip was a quiet confirmation of the wisdom of patience, of letting arrogance unravel under the weight of competence, without ever raising my voice or drawing attention to personal vendettas. I also orchestrated small, indirect meetings with other department heads, sharing updates on workflow improvements and efficiency gains. No one outside the team realized these interactions were carefully designed to underscore the boss's miscalculations. The effect was cumulative. Questions arose about his oversight, decisions he had made were scrutinized, and his credibility quietly eroded, all while I remained calm, professional, and unassuming. Even the team's day-to-day achievements became tactical tools. Each successful client interaction, each streamlined process, each exceeded target reinforced our quiet superiority. I encouraged initiative, celebrated results privately, and documented every success meticulously. Every report I submitted amplified the reality that the basement was not a punishment, but a stage where competence, patience, and strategy had revealed itself to all. By the end of the week, the boss's influence had weakened dramatically. He no longer spoke with certainty, deferred to my advice more than ever, and subtly avoided confrontations he once dominated. I didn't gloat, I didn't celebrate. I simply observed the power shift, the quiet culmination of months of strategy, and the inevitability of the final stage, where authority and respect would be quietly, undeniably restored. It began with a casual mention in a leadership meeting. A senior executive praising the basement team for exceeding targets, streamlining client processes, and delivering results that had previously seemed unattainable. My boss, seated across from me, stiffened subtly, realizing that this acknowledgement was not optional and could not be ignored. I stayed calm, watching the room absorb the reality I had quietly orchestrated over months. I didn't speak immediately. Instead, I let the recognition circulate, allowing others to see the undeniable impact of our team. Colleagues nodded in agreement, clients sent follow-up praise, and the leadership team began asking questions about how we had achieved such efficiency. Each inquiry, each nod of approval, was a quiet confirmation of strategy and patience. My boss's inability to answer confidently only highlighted his diminishing authority. Eventually, I spoke softly, professionally, with no trace of anger or resentment. I explained our processes, outlined the team's initiatives, and showcased results. Every detail reinforced the competence and diligence that had been quietly building in the basement. I did not gloat. I did not dramatize. The calm clarity of our achievements spoke for itself, forcing acknowledgement without confrontation. The boss attempted to interject, to reclaim attention, but the room had already shifted. Questions, clarifications, and admiration all flowed toward the basement team, leaving him sidelined. I maintained a steady presence, guiding the discussion with precision, highlighting solutions and reinforcing competence, all without ever appearing to challenge him personally. It was subtle, undeniable power, executed silently, masterfully, and without drama. Even the new hire, once celebrated for potential, could not match the consistent, quiet excellence our team displayed. Their errors became clear in contrast to our documented success, further emphasizing the boss's misjudgment. Leadership had no choice but to recognize the reality. The basement team's strategy, patience, and execution had quietly, decisively shifted authority. By the end of the meeting, acknowledgement was complete. Leadership praised the team formally, and my boss, without argument, had to concede control. There were no explosions of confrontation, no dramatic scenes, just the calm, methodical triumph of patience, strategy, and unwavering professionalism. The power had shifted quietly, completely, and irrevocably, leaving me with satisfaction, clarity, and the certainty that control had been restored. In the days following the public acknowledgement, my boss's authority crumbled almost imperceptibly, but entirely. Meetings that were once dominated by his directives now shifted naturally toward our basement team. Colleagues deferred to our judgment, clients sought our guidance, and every decision he attempted to assert was quietly questioned. His presence remained, but the influence he once wielded had dissolved without confrontation. I observed his attempts to reclaim relevance with quiet detachment. Each effort, a hastily called meeting, a directive pushed too forcefully, a critique aimed at our methods, only revealed the fragility of his position. I did not intervene or exploit these moments overtly. I merely allowed the natural consequences of his miscalculations to unfold. Every faltering move was a testament to patience, observation, and strategy. The new hire, meanwhile, faced growing pressure. Without my interference, their overconfidence collided with reality. Mistakes were magnified, timelines were missed, and client frustrations surfaced. Each error reinforced the superiority of the basement team, and by extension, the wisdom of calm, deliberate action. The contrast between competence and reckless ambition became painfully clear to everyone, including leadership. Even casual office interactions highlighted the shift. Conversations naturally gravitated toward solutions my team had implemented. Praise flowed quietly but consistently, and my boss's attempts to assert control were met with polite indifference or gentle redirection. His influence had eroded layer by layer, like a foundation weakened by invisible persistent forces. I remained silent, confident, and strategically invisible, knowing the collapse was both complete and inevitable. I documented every outcome meticulously, not for revenge, but for clarity and confirmation. Each success, each acknowledgement, and each subtle failure of my boss created a roadmap of quiet dominance, one that required no confrontation, no anger, no public spectacle. The work itself had dismantled arrogance and rewarded precision. Patience had become power, and observation had become authority. By the end of the month, the basement team's dominance was undeniable. Leadership, colleagues, and clients now sought guidance almost exclusively from us. My boss's presence had become ceremonial, his influence minimal, his credibility quietly eroded, and in that calm certainty, I recognized the ultimate lesson: power achieved through strategy, patience, and silent competence is unassailable, enduring, and profoundly satisfying. The acknowledgement from leadership was subtle, but profound. During a routine review, the executive team highlighted our basement team's consistent excellence, efficiency, and innovation. I didn't need to speak at length. My calm presence and meticulous documentation spoke louder than any words. My team, once relegated to the shadows, now carried quiet respect and undeniable authority across the company. I watched my boss from across the room, his attempts to reclaim authority now visibly restrained. He could no longer overshadow the achievements my team had earned. I didn't need to gloat or confront him. The recognition of our work was complete and irreversible. The balance of respect had shifted, not through drama or shouting, but through competence, strategy, and patience. Colleagues began seeking advice openly, deferring to our methods and judgment. Projects previously stalled were now moving smoothly, as clients and departments alike trusted the processes we had quietly perfected. Every acknowledgement, every small nod of approval reinforced the redemption of the basement team and validated the months of strategic patience I had invested. Even the new hire, once heralded as a rising star, had to adjust to the reality of our consistent performance. Errors were no longer overlooked. Guidance was sought from those with proven results, and credibility naturally aligned with our calm, deliberate approach. I did not celebrate their missteps. I simply allowed the truth to be recognized. The team's morale was now at an all-time high. Confidence, loyalty, and trust had been restored, and every member understood the power of calm, strategic action. We had turned a basement, once a symbol of punishment, into a testament of capability, resilience, and professional mastery. The quiet victory was complete, yet no animosity remained. As I sat in my office reflecting on the journey, I realized that true influence is built quietly, through observation, patience, and strategic action. Redemption was not just professional, it was personal. I had navigated betrayal, preserved my dignity, and emerged with authority that could not be challenged. Peace, control, and recognition had been restored, silently, deliberately, and unassailably. The weeks that followed were calm, almost serene. The basement team's success had become a quiet standard for excellence across the company. Leadership no longer questioned our methods. Colleagues deferred to our judgment, and the mistakes of the past, both my boss's miscalculations and the new hires' overconfidence, had become lessons rather than conflicts. The tension that had once gripped the office had dissolved entirely. I felt a profound sense of closure. The betrayal, the subtle undermining, the quiet strategy, all of it had led to a natural, unforced resolution. There was no need for confrontation, no dramatic reckoning. Control and respect had returned through patience, skill, and strategic observation. I had proven that influence built through competence and calm resolve is far more enduring than any display of anger or force. The boss, once confident and commanding, now existed in a space of professional humility. He had not been humiliated through spectacle, but through undeniable results. Every interaction reminded him of the quiet shift in power that had taken place, a lesson in patience, awareness, and the long arc of strategy. I watched with a quiet satisfaction that was deeper than revenge. It was the serenity of knowing justice had been executed without compromise to my character. The team flourished. Their confidence, once fragile, now radiated through every project and meeting. They had learned a powerful lesson that patience, resilience, and loyalty, combined with careful observation and quiet execution, could overcome arrogance and poor judgment. The basement, once a place of punishment, had become a symbol of empowerment, transformation, and mastery. Personally, I embraced the calm that came with closure. I no longer carried the weight of betrayal or the lingering question of what if. The work itself had corrected injustice, and the resulting recognition and authority were earned, not demanded. The satisfaction was complete, not because others had fallen, but because integrity, patience, and intelligence had prevailed. And so I moved forward with clarity, confidence, and freedom. The power dynamic had been restored, not with noise or anger, but with strategy, patience, and silent execution. The lessons were etched in the company, in the team, and within myself. Betrayal can be met with calm observation, revenge can be measured and silent, and true closure comes not from confrontation, but from mastery, control, and earned respect. Peace, finally, was mine.